In this episode of the Real Sales Manager podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Mike Slater, an experienced and a very successful sales leader who's held senior positions at CompuWare, IBM, Software AG, SAP, Unit 4, and most recently as Chief Revenue Officer at Sarala. We discussed many aspects of sales management, including coaching, developing interpersonal relationships. We focused a lot on pipeline management, on qualification, on managing the forecast, with some really insightful recommendations, including lots of very practical advice. Find out Mike's views on skills versus talents, why he once produced 26 versions of a business case, why sometimes he prefers to have a hole in the team, what is his personal killer question when reviewing deals, and a host of other topics, all really relevant to sales managers. Enjoy. So Mike, thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. I know you're about to dash off to your place in Spain, so finding some time to do this is great. We always start with a couple of standard questions. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got into sales management in the first place and kind of what that journey has been?
Oh, wow. Yes. So you have to go back probably about 25 years, believe it or not.
Right.
The usual situation is that you happen to be the highest performing salesperson, you get noticed, and then you get promoted into becoming a sales leader. So I was actually 29 years old when I had my first sales leadership role, but everyone in my team was much older than me. They were like in their 40s, late 30s.
Yeah.
But I had the fortunate situation that I had the credibility with my team because I had been a high performer. What I would say is that formula doesn't always work. And just because you're the best salesperson doesn't necessarily translate into being a good sales leader. But I was very, very fortunate in the sense that I had a good sales leadership around me to learn from. Mm-hmm. And I had exceptional training, exceptional coaching, which often doesn't happen when you make that transition. So I got lucky, is the honest truth, that I had that support. And what was the biggest surprise was I didn't appreciate that other salespeople wouldn't naturally do the things that I did. And it was a shock and surprise that the basics weren't always natural to other salespeople. So I think that was the biggest calibration that I had. And then eventually I recognized this and would coach accordingly. And I had a knack of just knowing who the A players were to try to get them in my team. And as a sales leader, you're only as successful as your team, really.
Right. Well, we'll probably come back to that. Interesting. It's whenever I have these conversations, it is often the case that kind of people fall into the role rather than it being, a grand plan over a number of years. But you were, I use the word promoted, moved into sales management at a fairly early age. You had a lot of credibility. Did you get any pushback from the more experienced or more mature members of the team?
Not as much as I thought I would have, if I'm honest. There was one salesperson who, was too comfortable, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And, I recognized that he would come in, put his jacket on the chair, and then somehow would disappear, and then come in at the end of the day, take his jacket, and then disappear. And so eventually we saw this pattern, and I recognized he just wasn't doing the job. And very, very quickly I fired him because he made up stories that he was with customers, but when I spoke to those customers, they had never met him for the last sort of 6 to 9 months. So as soon as that happened, it just wasn't tenable. And I think sometimes you have to make some hard decisions quite early. And obviously they have to be justified and then it just becomes very obvious that you are somebody who will call the shots when it's necessary.
Yeah. And if you think about new sales managers in general, I mean, there's often a debate with a new sales manager about, should they try and build relationships with the team, or should they be hard and make those hard decisions early on? Generally, we talk about it's easier to go from hard to soft. It's difficult to go from soft to hard, as it were. Is that your experience as for yourself, but also as you see new sales managers going into roles through your career?
Well, I've never really thought of it that way. I would say that you want to have healthy relationships with your team,
Yes.
and nobody comes into the virtual office these days and there's no sign above the door that says you are no longer an adult, you're now a child, right? So having that parent-child relationship just doesn't work, particularly these days.
Yeah.
So you have to treat them with mutual respect, and you've heard the phrase respect is earned, it's not given. So you have to earn the respect, but the best way of doing that is by adding genuine value.
Yeah.
But and then hard, soft. Ultimately, treat people with respect, but do not be afraid to make tough decisions. And by the way, if you don't make those tough decisions, the A players always question why. Why? Well, this person's not delivering X, Y, Z. Why is that? Why is that person allowed to continue in that way? So, what I would say is that sometimes making the right decision in terms of letting go a poor performer is actually motivation for other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Interesting. Can I just go back? I mean, reflecting on when you were first moved into the position, but also looking at, you've got lots of experience, seeing lots of, you will have put lots of people into sales management roles. But what are the main characteristics or traits or attributes to be successful as a first line sales manager today, would you say?
I would say you have to be a great coach. I mean, first of all, you need to be able to spot what makes a great salesperson to hire the right people, and I can come on to that if you like. But you have to be able to coach both in the field and when you're doing forecast calls and so on and so forth. And coaching is not telling, right? So you have to be very careful with that. And if you are a good coach, you can get the best out of your team, and then that's also how you can lead your team. If you are simply a manager that manages by spreadsheet and process, very rarely will you have respect from your team, because they won't think that they can come to you for advice or to help them, or to essentially have their back. And I think that's quite important as a sales manager.
Right. Okay. So spotting and being able to get the right people or the best people into the team, and then coaching them, the ability to coach, you'd say the two paramount things. And do you think that's changing at all? Because we're bombarded by messages around data-driven selling, the fact that it's because it's virtual, the AI tools that are coming in. Is that changing? You made the comment you can't manage via a spreadsheet, which I would totally agree with. But there's a lot more data around. B, we're being encouraged to, as managers, to follow that or be led by that data more. Do you see that in your world? Or
yeah, of course, there's much better insights, tooling, and you should use that as a tool, but you shouldn't use that as the only way to manage. And I think the best way of describing it is as a sales manager, or when you're managing a team or leading a team, it's about the relationship and hiring the right people and implementing or executing on the best practices. But when you go from managing a team to managing an organization, then you have to have those data insights and those tools. You simply can't manage 200-300 people
Sure.
one-to-one all the time. So you have to have some kind of insights, and then you use those insights to just give you more focus when you're doing the one-on-one coaching.
Yeah. So presumably, I mean, for me, one of the joys of first line management is that you're close enough to the action that you should have all that information. You know your people, you know your customers almost intimately. But at the same time, as a first line manager, you're kind of playing on a bigger canvas as well. So although there's lots of data around that can help us, and it is a tool, really as sales managers, we should be looking to get the best out of people through our own knowledge. Is that what you're saying? And I mean,
look, it's also very powerful to use those tools in your coaching. So it's not, I spotted this, I'm going to try and catch my salesperson out. It should be information that is shared with the salesperson. Ideally, the salesperson also has access to that information. And then it's like, oh, look, I spotted this. What do you make of it? Do you agree? Are there characteristics that we should focus on? And how would you like to address those things? So it becomes, you're co-authoring certain areas for personal growth.
Okay.
But it's quite important. So this is another thing that I've learned is you can give people skills, but you can never give them talent. Right? This is really key because most sales leaders don't understand this difference. And if it's a talent gap, honestly, so many times I see people trying to put in what's never going to be there, and that ends up in a bad outcome. But more, okay, let's look at the talent you have and how do we get more out of what's in there and take it to another level. That's the best way of coaching people.
Okay, so can you give me an example? I mean, that's a really interesting insight. Can you give me an example of, for you, the difference between a skill and a talent?
Yeah, well, look, a talent is essentially personality. It's things like drive, hunger, curiosity. You can't give those people those things. What you can do is, if they have the underlying talent to be curious, you can remind them to always ask the second, third question, why, the 3 whys, those kind of things. Whereas skill is things such as following a methodology, a process. Sometimes actually you still need talent to do that properly. But often it's okay. What we need to do is the next step. And it's not that salespeople don't have those skills, but often they would forget them without having learned the process. So that's probably the difference. It's more personality versus a more tactical action plan.
And you use the phrase A players quite a lot. Are the A players, presumably they need both. They need a lot of talent, but then you can develop their skills on top of that. Is that how you see it?
Yeah. So look, we mentioned being able to recruit the right people. And usually, there's 2 types of salespeople typically. Right? There are those that have the relationship skills. They can get to senior people. They can ask for favors. They have that, essentially the personality piece. Then there are those that have a very clear methodology, MEDPICC, for example, MEDPICC, and they follow this process to the T. It's like a formula. Most salespeople fall into those 2 camps. The ones that blow everybody out of the water have both.
Right.
And that actually is quite a rare breed. It really is. And if you look at all of the salespeople that you've worked with in your career, or that maybe a sales leader has in their team, you'll find that it's only a very small proportion that have both. Usually it's like one in, I mean, I would even say it's only 5% of all salespeople I've ever come across have both.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So when you're looking to bring people into the team as, A players or potential A players. You talked about you can develop skills, you can give people tools, but talent is, you can nurture it, I guess, or allow it to some freedom. But when you're recruiting, do you look more for that basic talent, or do you look for people who've, proven that they can execute on some kind of methodology?
But it's always advantageous if they are used to following methodology, because then it's the ramp up times much quicker.
Yeah,
But ultimately, hire for talent, because that's the thing you can't give.
yeah,
And then you can give them the skills. But it also depends on how quick you want them to ramp up and learn. But
yeah,
those that are truly hungry, that have that sense of urgency, have that drive, they will learn it. They
yeah,
will, because they're so keen to get ahead, and they
yeah,
have that competitive edge already. They will probably want to be the best salesperson, not just hit their target. They want to beat their peers in a nice way, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, those are the things you can't coach for,
yeah, yeah.
but then everything else you can. So that's what I look for. Now, of course, if there are people who naturally lend themselves to a process and they have those talents, then that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the best way of qualifying that in an interview process, yes, you can ask tough questions, but I always do a role play with them,
Oh,
pretending to
okay.
be the customer and seeing how they perform with handling objections and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. I always do that, but there's often pushback, from recruiters and people saying, "Why did they put me through that?" Did But for you, it works.
Well, if they don't want to do that, then they're the wrong person, I would say.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, yeah,
Now, look, I know I'm probably a little bit old-fashioned and the world has changed and all of those things, but if they want to be a true professional at what they want to do, they'll have to do role plays in real life
yeah.
before they, uh, you know, uh, grow and excel and talk to the customer, for example. And
Absolutely.
actually, I even do them. Right? Going into a really important sales meeting, even today, I will do role plays with my leaders or with myself,
Yeah.
just to be able to be really on top of your game and always sharp on the saw.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me, it's the mark of a professional. Okay, Mike, can I just go back because we're focusing on particularly new sales managers. You said you were really lucky. You got some excellent training. You got lots of support in your first role. Um, for you, what's the best way for new sales managers to learn? Is it to go on lots of training courses? Is it to follow somebody else around? What works for you, and what have you seen working for other people? How do people develop themselves, particularly over the first 6 or 12 months, which for many sales managers, that's a difficult period as there's a bit of a honeymoon period maybe, but they're still figuring out what's their natural style. They're still figuring out what the job really entails. So from your perspective, what's the best way for a new sales manager to go about learning their craft, learning their trade?
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
good question. So when I look at some of the sales leaders who I've mentored, but weren't
okay.
necessarily reporting to me,
Yeah.
but I mentored them in their first, excuse me, in their first sort of months.
Yeah.
There's usually one or two terrorists in the team,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it's quite, and they have quite a lot of influence against their peers.
Yeah.
So really, really important to get those individuals on side.
Yeah.
Meet with them on a regular basis, socially too.
Yeah.
Ask them for help, and I want to make sure that we maximize the performance of this team. You're
Yeah.
absolutely key for that, and I know a lot of people look up to you, stroke their ego. I'd love you to work with me closely on this. So you're
Yeah.
getting them on side rather than having them probably feeling they should have got the job and so on and so forth, and as a potential, as I said, terrorist in the team. So that's quite important.
Yeah.
Always have a mentor that's not
Yeah.
necessarily your direct boss.
Yeah.
So another mentor that you can bounce off of whenever you do have challenging situations, because you will have those. It's going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you do about this? Whether it's forecast accuracy, whether it's a particular individual in your team, whether it's should I hire somebody? It could be anything, but always have someone that you can bounce ideas off of.
Yeah.
That's not your direct boss, or in addition to your direct boss.
Right. Yes. Got that. Okay. So that kind of sounding board.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are there any kind of guides for sales managers, any books, videos, training courses that you've come across that have particularly impressed you to help in this phase?
Yeah. So look, I think I've talked about coaching,
Yeah.
and what I've found is when you teach other people, you become better yourself.
Yeah.
It happens, right? You become even better.
Yeah.
And that's the very first sort of field-based sales role in software that I had in the late 90s. I joined a company called CompuWare.
Okay.
I was super green as a salesperson. I probably would never have hired myself. I was lucky that they hired me.
Okay.
And then I found out, this is how poor I was at qualification. Only after I got the job, I found out that my territory was the northwest of England, and I had to drive there every single day from London and back every day.
Really?
Yeah, so it was, and you weren't allowed to stay over in hotels in those days, so it was a tough gig. But I was young
Yeah.
enough to put up with it and do it. Now, so I had a lot of time in the car, and a friend of mine lent me some CDs. For those that don't know what CDs are, they're like shiny discs.
Yeah.
And it was 5 CDs of sales training, and there's lots of these things, and usually they're okay. But this particular one was by a guy called John Costigan, and it was called "What to Say and How to Say It."
Okay.
And I learned so much from listening to those over and over and over and over again, almost 6 to 8 hours a day, that I brainwashed myself on some really amazing best practices, which I think really helped me with my sales coaching, because I could use some of those techniques that I learned. And it's not so much people don't know what to do, it's literally just the words. Just a good example would be, if you want to get to the true decision maker and you're speaking to somebody, you don't say, "Oh, so who really makes the decisions?" or "Who's the person I need to really speak to?" because that's going to be offensive to the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
Not difficult to understand. So it's just saying things like, okay, so who else in addition to you is critical for this decision process?
Yeah.
And just that tiny set of words makes all the difference.
Yeah.
And then the other things, which is my biggest fear. So, for example, often salespeople will always like to hear the good news the customer gives them.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily question the playing what I call devil's advocate.
Yeah.
But what I learned from these techniques was always understand the customer's buying dysfunction. The customer doesn't usually know how to buy, and they don't know the pitfalls.
Yeah.
So it would be it's great, I'm hearing all of this, but my biggest fear is that while you think this makes sense and we can get it in by the end of the quarter, the other key people in the process don't have that focus and maybe have other priorities. How can you help me with that?
Right.
Or what should we do about that?
Yeah.
So these are really powerful techniques to further qualify, is what I'm hearing accurate?
Right.
Or am I just believing what the customer's telling me? Because human nature is you want to believe the good news.
Yeah. That's really interesting. So for me, I call it the craft, sales craft, and it's just the slight different way that you phrase things can make a huge difference. And it sounds like you immersed yourself in this stuff, listening to CDs on the M6 or whatever. Today, I guess it's podcasts, but as a professional, constantly just looking to find those details, that find the things that are going to work. That's really interesting. And that comment around how you work with your champion to help the fears and that kind of stuff. That's really interesting. Can we go back again to qualification? Because it was Richard Bounds who recommended you come on the podcast, and you've got a tremendous reputation, Mike, around qualification, helping salespeople to qualify deals, look at pipelines. So do you use any particular methodology or anything there? You've mentioned MEDPICC already, but for you, when you're trying to qualify, both as a salesperson, but particularly as a sales manager, what are the tools that you found useful?
Yeah, so MEDPICC is it's something that I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
But I have a thing called a deal scorecard, which is a slight variation of that. And the reason why it's a slight variation is because of some of my experiences that I found where even if you follow MEDPICC, it doesn't quite cover off some of the issues.
Sure.
So a good example would be, we'll start with metrics, or business case.
Yeah.
If you've agreed the business case with the customer, the natural reaction for the salesperson is, okay, that's tick. M is the tick. Done.
Right. Okay.
But who is the customer? Right. Very rarely that customer is one person.
Yeah.
Typically, you need 6+ what I call mobilizers or champions for a complex sales cycle. And well, really, that agreeing the business case is pointless unless the economic buyer or the key decision makers also agree with the business case.
Yeah.
So there's an additional set of actions you need to do in order for that to happen. And the best example is probably one of the largest deals that I did at Software AG, $30 million. We did 26 versions of the business case.
Really?
And it wasn't that we got it wrong 25 times. It was because we took the business case to 25, 26 different people, and they all tweaked the business case.
Yeah.
But what that meant was it was agreed with the whole organization. So it was almost impossible for them to disagree with it because 26 decision makers or people within the buying center had co-authored the business case with us.
Yeah.
So that's a good example where you have to go the extra mile rather than just saying, metrics tick. Another good example is champion.
Okay.
Of course, you need a champion, but often salespeople will think that if they're positive, they want us instead of the competition, well, then of course they're a champion.
Right.
And what I found, so this actually was also my experience at Software AG, where I had a team in South Africa.
Okay.
Now in South Africa, everybody knows everybody. They go to the same weddings, the same funerals. So they have amazing relationships. And they had, in certain key deals, they had 10, 12 different champions. So, wow, fantastic, right? Not only are they not single-threaded, which I'll come on to in a second, but they have many champions. Actually, what we realized is that they weren't champions as such. They were just sponsors. And the difference is that a champion is a true mobilizer. So I rephrased the term to, are they a mobilizer or just a talker?
Right.
Now, a talker will be super positive, but they will never get your deal done. Whereas a mobilizer, makes shit happen, right? They will find a way. When the board says no, they go, fine. Well, what do you need to see to say yes? That's a true mobilizer. And often it's a personality trait. Do they have the political capital? So I finesse, MEDPICC to say, right, well, do we have mobilizers, and how many mobilizers do we have? Most salespeople make the mistake of having just one sponsor, but you need multiple mobilizers.
Yeah. That's a really interesting distinction. Okay, so you would use a tool like MEDPICC, and I mean there are others. MEDPICC has a great reputation, but you would always enhance it a little bit, based on your market and your propositions, and
each one has a different sort of level of scoring. So, for example, are we with the economic buyer? Well, yes, but maybe we met them once a year ago, or maybe we're having regular meetings with that individual. Or the other one is actually the best one is the decision process. So have we agreed all the process and timescales to stop to make sure the deal closes? But have we also identified what could stop the deal happening in that process?
Right.
And have we agreed the process and timescales or the mutual plan with all of the key people rather than just one individual?
Yeah.
And so there's different levels of quality. And then the best one, the deals that I've experienced close on the day, you say, not necessarily the end of the quarter or the end of the month, but on the specific day that it's forecast, which is quite tough to do, is when you have daily reviews. I mean, daily reviews of the decision process. So are we on track? What's what do we have to recalibrate? And that sounds a bit tough, right? Well, daily reviews with a customer. Well, but I always encourage my salespeople to, when you're getting towards the end of the sales cycle, maybe the last 3 weeks or maybe the last month or so, do you mind if we have a daily check-in? It can be just 5 minutes. And if there's nothing to talk about, we can say not needed today, but it's in the diary. At the end of each day, we just check we're on track. That is the best way of controlling a sales process. And it's not difficult to do, but very rarely do I see it done. When it is done, then you can keep your deal focused to close on the day you forecasted.
So, Mike, what I'm hearing is the attention to detail that you put into these things, it far surpasses what I normally see in the market. Yeah, so 27 versions of the business plan, each one geared to a particular individual, daily check-ins on your close plan or your mutual close plan. I mean, very few people go to those lengths. Is it just because you're selling? Yeah. Is it just because?
You wouldn't do it for a relatively small deal. What I'm describing to you are when it's high 6 figures, 7 figure type deals. But if you're looking at shorter sales cycles, you might not go to that length. But even if it's a smallish deal, the last week or two, why not have a 5-minute check-in?
No, I'm totally with you. In terms of you as the sales leader working with your salespeople and suggesting things like this, how do you come over as a coach rather than micromanaging when you're going to that level of detail on any deal? And again, it's probably coming back to the craft of how you present it, how you work with people. But from your point of view, how do you, as a sales leader, you don't want to be seen to be micromanaging, but you do want your people to be totally professional at a very high level of detail?
It's a good one. So look, there will be some where, particularly those who've been doing things a certain way for the last 20 years and are very reluctant to change. There are those individuals. But the sales people who are young, hungry, eager to learn will lap it up. And then the A players always want additional ideas, advice. That they don't have an ego to say, well, no, I don't need you to help me. I think the real answer to your question is to make sure as a manager you're adding value.
Right.
If you're doing a deal review, for example, and the salesperson's a little bit stuck or doesn't feel in control, I mean, they know in their heart that they're just hoping the deal happens rather than knowing the deal's going to happen. In those situations, if you can come up with 2 or 3 ideas in a deal review that they hadn't already thought of, then that's gold for a salesperson. But in addition to those ideas, help them with the execution of it. So it might be that you as the sales manager or sales leader would have to take an action to help the deal happening. Or you get the senior manager and even the CEO, to put in an email or make a phone call because they have the power of the title to maybe get to someone you're struggling to get hold of. So in those situations, if the salesperson's getting benefit from that then very soon they become advocates and they start even telling their colleagues, oh, that was really good. I mean, you absolutely should be doing these things because it made such a difference to me. And what I would often do in quarterly kickoffs or whatever it might be, is I'd tend to get a salesperson that benefited from that to present and talk to the rest of the team as to why it helped them, rather than it's me telling the salespeople that.
Sure. Okay, interesting. And clearly, I mean, with A players, when they are, demanding of your time, please, can you come and do a deal review with me? That's where you really want to get to. Do you, as a sales manager for you, or the sales managers who work for you, do you encourage people to have, very regular pipeline reviews where they look at all the deals, or do you prefer more in-depth, deep dives or whatever you want to call them on deals? How do you think you add value most? Is it, looking in depth at a particular deal, or trying to help people manage their pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the answer is you've got to do both. And
Okay.
when you're looking at all of the deals and all of the pipeline, you can't go into every single deal. But you can ask basic questions. So every pipeline review, forecast review, deal review, as a sales leader, you have to think of it as a coaching opportunity.
Yeah.
If you're just gathering information, managing numbers, I mean, this is just time out of the salesperson's week. So it's precious selling time you're wasting. But if in that process you ask some key questions, okay, so let's look at your deals. Okay, you've got these 12 deals. Well, hang on, these two haven't progressed for the last couple of months. So why do you think that is? And oh, well, I just haven't heard back from the customer, or okay, what should we do about that? So should it really be in your forecast? But more importantly, how can we help? Then that adds value. But obviously, when you're doing a specific deal review, first of all, you should have the power of the team there. So you get anybody that's in that deal. So that could be your solution architects, could be the partner team, it could be the consulting team, whatever. But then you have the power of the team working together, brainstorming ideas. Nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. So again, if they come away from those deal reviews with 2 or 3 ideas they haven't thought of before, then that's really the coaching that goes on. But to answer your question, pipeline reviews are just as important as forecast reviews. And the reason why I say that is, there's 2 things a salesperson does. They create pipeline, they close it. Those are the 2 things. And often sales managers, because of quarter pressures, they get focused on just the deals that they can see in front of them. And then they have a hiatus of too few deals, not enough pipeline. So you have to make sure that you're reviewing is the pipeline healthy, and be careful of what you usually see, particularly those salespeople that are working on large deals, is these deals move from quarter to quarter rather than there's new pipeline going into the system. So how do we make sure there's regular pipeline going in? I use a particular KPI, which I can talk about if you like. And the key thing is that if you've not got a fresh pipeline going in, that's a major red flag. Oh, by the way, if a salesperson has a huge amount of pipeline, that's actually the best retention policy you can have, right? Because the salesperson is very unlikely to be persuaded to move elsewhere. And the biggest attrition risk is once they've done their biggest deals. They close their deals, and then if they don't have pipeline, I've got to start all over again. That's the time when they're at risk.
And why wouldn't I start over again with somebody else who's maybe offered me something interesting? I mean, I find lots of sales managers don't even understand the difference between pipeline and forecast in terms of they'll have a weekly meeting and they'll look at top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel. But, I think from what you're suggesting, they are 2 distinct activities. For me, the tone of them is going to be different as well. So, do it at separate times, maybe with different people in the room. You said you had a KPI for looking at pipeline?
Yeah. So look, it depends on your business, but if you look at, say, a 4-to-1 conversion ratio, it depends if it's a new logo or existing customer or whatever. But let's pretend it's 4-to-1.
Okay.
Well, then, therefore, every 90 days, 90 days being about a quarter of a year,
Yeah.
if the salesperson is putting in equivalent to their annual number, then
Okay.
they've got a healthy injection of pipeline. So, and this statistic works. Everybody knows that annual target.
Yeah.
Whether you are looking at it globally or a team level or an individual level. So if your personal target is, say, 750K for the year, well, then every 90 days, are you putting in 750K of additional pipeline? And it doesn't have to be just you personally. It could be through, if you've got a SDR team or marketing, fine. But you're responsible for your business, so you need to make sure somehow that is being added. And if you haven't added sufficient pipeline in the last 90 days, or that's going to be a problem down the line. So
yeah. Okay. Nice and simple.
Yes.
And sometimes we overcomplicate these things, but yeah, it's interesting. Whenever clients talk to me about they have a problem with closing off on a forecast, 9 times out of 10, whenever you look into it, it's not a problem around closing. It's a problem around generating pipeline and how you set things up early on. Okay. Interesting. So it's also interesting you say, these things are coaching opportunities. A lot of sales managers, particularly new sales managers, think they're there to inspect and to report a number upwards, but actually being clear about what your purpose is. If you've got a bunch of people on a call or in a room, the purpose is to improve our chances here. And as the manager, you're helping that through forecasting rather than, as you say, just being almost an administrator and moving things upwards and downwards. Okay. Are there any, we talked about MEDPICC and anything. Are there any particular questions that work for you? If you only you're looking at a deal or in a pipeline review or whatever, in a forecast review, sorry. But what are the 1 or 2 key questions that you would fall back on, or you may say you can't do that? But what for you are the key things that you look for?
Yeah. So look, if you're doing a forecast review, again, one of the biggest mistakes new sales managers make is believing the salesperson when they say, "Yeah, I think this. I'm confident of this deal."
Right.
Now, it's not that the salesperson is lying or that they are not good at their job, but there's a big difference between this deal being in the salesperson's head, and when I say deal, I mean deal for a given time frame, and being in the customer's head. So fine, okay, so you're confident. Is the customer confident, or how and why are they confident? Right. Just check that this is a forecast, or at least you've got a verbal commitment, if not a written commitment. That's really what you need from the customer. So is this just an aspiration for the salesperson, or is this something that's under some kind of control? And if it's an aspiration, fine. If you want to put it as an upside, because we're paid to make things happen that otherwise wouldn't happen. So that's you still want to encourage that, but you might not put it in your forecast. Right. But to really answer your question, the most powerful question I think is what can stop this deal from happening?
Yeah.
Because very rarely salespeople think that way. They think what can make it happen, and that's really critical. You have to know that. But they very rarely think about what can stop it happening until you hit that hurdle or something surprises you at the very end. Now, they might come up with a typical answer. Well, the board could say no, but then it's okay. Why might the board say no? What things could stop? And if the board says yes, what else could stop it from happening? So the most important thing is that you ask the salesperson that, you get a sense of if they're really in control or not.
Yeah.
And then it's, well, okay, have you asked the customer the same question?
Right.
Have you asked the customer? What did they say? They said nothing. So nothing can stop this. Okay. So why is it not already closed? So it's just obviously you've got to use it in a way that it doesn't sound like micromanagement or demeaning, but you're coaching them. Okay, if you haven't asked them, maybe you should ask, or when did you last ask them that? Well, it was about 2 weeks ago. Well, maybe it's worth just double checking that what they said back then hasn't changed. And also, think of what I call a qualified questions, which is, one thing that could stop it happening is if you're too expensive. Just pick that up. Okay. And often the sales guys go, I've asked the question, tick. Well, no, now ask a conditional question, which is, fine, assuming it's not too expensive or we come to a commercial agreement, what else could stop it from happening? Because it's the unknown you're trying to get to, not the things that you know are obvious, right? It's the unknown.
Yes.
Well, the CFO, I think he might be, I think he's focused on this other project and he's pretty busy with that. Okay. What can we do about that then? Can we make sure it's on his radar now, or check with him that he's comfortable that we're aiming for this deadline? And that's just a courtesy to say, look, we're this is the plan we've worked to. Can we just check it meets with your approval? Right. So it just allows you to do these things proactively rather than find out at the end, in retrospect, in hindsight, we should have done X, Y, Z.
What's really, I mean, that's great. And it does force most salespeople to look at it from a different perspective. And good salespeople are naturally optimistic, but that strength can be a weakness. There's two other things that just struck me from what you said there, Mike, was you use the word why a lot. So, why is it going to go to this board meeting? Why might they say this? So just digging deep with the why question, but also the way you expressed it, you were always asking questions of the salespeople rather than telling them, have you thought of, or is it an idea to, rather than telling them. And that's for new sales managers, I think that's a really important thing just to bear in mind. We're always pulling people towards us rather than pushing things at them. Mike, this is really, really great. There's so much good practical stuff coming out of this. I'm just going to draw this section to a close. I've got a bonus question that we ask you at the end, but if you had to summarize, what would be your 3 biggest hints or tips for a new sales manager? What were the 3 things that you would say, they should really focus on, particularly over the first 12 months?
Yeah, look, so when someone's not performing, it's very difficult to think. Often a new sales manager will stick with that low performer in the hope that they eventually turn the corner. And you've got to, and that can kill you. I mean, because if you delay that for 6-9 months, then you realize, then they leave. Either you let them go, or they decide to go because they're not performing, and then you have to hire somebody else, which takes some time. Then they have to ramp up. I mean, you've lost the best part of 18 months. That's the cost of not making a quick decision. So just very quickly ascertain, can this person make it or not? And to do that, you need to agree what good looks like with them, agree what the realistic milestones are to see that actually if they do X, Y, Z in the next month or 2, then there is a chance they could turn the corner. But if in that first month they're still way off the mark, then it's only fair to that individual to allow them to go on with the rest of their life, right? So
absolutely,
and there's a phrase, it's not my phrase, but I will say it. I think it actually comes from Richard Branson, which is to have a hole in the team is better than having an arsehole in the team. Now, it doesn't mean your team will have arsehole, right? But it's important to know that actually a vacancy is sometimes better than having someone that's not performing, because with a vacancy you can manage their opportunities with your other salespeople or yourself. But more importantly, you'll have a greater sense of urgency to rehire somebody. And so yeah, much rather have a smaller team of A players than a larger team when all the resource, time, and energy is being wasted on people who are never going to cut it. And when I say resources, I'm talking about solution architects that are doing a lot of work that will never materialize when they could be doing it for much better opportunities. So I think that's one of the key things. I think the other thing is just sometimes actually you get better performance out of spending time with your best people than with your not so good people. So the natural behavior is someone's not performing, I need to spend time with them, and I need to whatever. Which by the way, you're not saying you should ignore those people, but if you can get an extra 20% performance out of your top performer rather than 20% performance out of your bottom performer, then it's natural.
And there's a big temptation to just let those people get on with it because they're not creating problems for you. But interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And then what's the third one? I think just be really clear. Whether it's MEDPICC or something, some of the things that I've mentioned, just understand that the customer typically doesn't know how to buy software or buy whatever it is you're selling them. Most customers have never bought that before in their life, unless you're talking to procurement. And even procurement often don't know the new process that's just changed in the last month or so, particularly with compliance requirements and DPAs and security, IT security terms. These things are always ever changing. So, and I've bought software before. I've been a buyer, and I've promised that things will close at a certain time frame, and I said to myself as a mobilizer, but I found out too late that there was a new step in the process. So just if the customer's telling you how things are going to map out in terms of the process, don't just take it as read. Always question, how can you be so sure? Or what could have changed? How do we know that all the people in the process are agreeing with what we've just agreed? And so just really constantly question and essentially be the coach of the customer. Are you coaching the customer of how to buy? I think that's really, really important.
That's I don't think it's just software. Almost any industry subject to change. And even I was dealing with a client who sells forklift trucks, which you think is almost a commodity, but no, it's a complex sale. It changes, and whilst they're selling these things every day, customers are only buying them every couple of years. So it's it also falls in nicely with one of our mantras: is that great salespeople don't sell; they get lots of people to buy from them. So that whole focus on the buying process rather than the push of selling. Right, I could talk to you all day long, and there'll be lots coming out of it. But on the basis that people are in cars listening to this and that the motorway is about to run out, we're going to have to call this to a close. We'll come back with a bonus question in a second. But any final words of wisdom before we close down the main section?
Yeah. So look, if you think about high performers versus average or mediocre performers, right? The average, those mediocre performers might be 60 percenters, right? Maybe 70 percenters. Whereas the high performers, typically they are over 200-300% of their number.
Yeah.
So the difference between the two is fourfold in terms of performance. And then you've got to ask yourself, well, why is that? Maybe they got a lucky break, maybe luck happens, but everyone knows those salespeople that year after year they smash their number.
Yeah.
And everyone knows those that year after year struggle to hit the number.
Yes.
And there's many things, and talked about the people who have the relationship skills and those that have the methodology, having both of those. But what I found is one of the biggest differences is that the salespeople that are mediocre, they tend to stick with just one decision maker or one sponsor or champion. I mean, they think it's a champion, but they might just be a talker.
Yeah.
Whereas the outstanding performers, they engage with everybody in the buying center, including the economic buyer. And therefore, if someone who's backing your deal leaves the company, or someone who is backing your deal all of a sudden is ill or on holiday, your deal just stops, right? And so, and more importantly, that you're selling to a company, you're not selling to a person. So is it the company that wants your solution, or is it just one person?
Yeah.
So that's probably the biggest difference between the two. So I always look at, how many people you engage with that are backing our solution, because that's the biggest difference of performance.
Yeah. Amazing. Going to that, the organogram, looking at, what is that buying center, tells you so much. Mike, once again, you got lots for us to think about there, lots for new sales managers to take on board. Can I just say thank you? It's been really enjoyable. I've learned a lot as well. So thanks ever so much.
You're welcome.
Bonus question.
Okay, so Mike, as a bonus, can you just tell us what's one of the biggest mistakes you've made as a sales manager and what you learned from it, and maybe also to balance that your biggest triumph and what you've learned from it?
Yeah, so biggest mistake. I mean, I mentioned that it's better to have a hole in the team than an asshole in the team, right? But that was through trial and error as well. And I think in my early days, I would probably hang on to people who weren't necessarily performing or had a chance to perform longer than I should have done.
Yeah.
And this, as I said, costs you 18 months in a particular territory or a particular spot. And eventually I came to learn that actually you're doing someone a disservice by keeping them in a role that doesn't fit them.
Yeah.
And ultimately people just don't change that much. The talent side or the personality side, you can't give someone personality, so people just don't change that much, and understand that as early as possible. And the way, it's never nice letting people go. And the way to be able to let people go is to be sure in your heart that actually it's right for them. You're doing them a favor.
Yeah.
So my mistake was hanging on to people for too long, and that was my learning point from that.
Oh, okay. Interesting. But it's so difficult for a new sales manager, who maybe doesn't have confidence, hasn't had that experience to do the pruning, which is sometimes very necessary.
Well, also, I think sales managers often want to show that they can make somebody perform that otherwise hadn't performed. That's the temptation, and my example of my most favorite success actually was when that did work.
Oh, okay.
So I had a sales lady that was originally my peer, and then I was her manager. This is my first management role, and she's actually worked really, really hard, had the right talents, personality, but for whatever reason, her deals were not closing fast enough. And then when through the coaching process, why is that? What do you think? And actually went out in the field with her. What I realized is that she was taking a lot of the positives the customer was saying, but not playing devil's advocate with the customer. So, for example, the customer might say to her, your product is great because of this, and this. That's every salesperson wants to hear that, right?
Yeah.
And she would say, and in addition, it can do that and this. So she was what I call tail selling on top of
Yeah.
the customer. But what she should have been doing was saying, okay, great. So why are those things important?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you like that feature? And who else would care about that? And why is that an important differentiator for the business?
Yeah.
And is this just a nice to have? So those are the things that she should have been doing. So now in those days, people didn't have iPads or even laptops, I think. So the coaching action in our one-to-one was that to remind herself to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
She wrote on the top of every single one of her every page in her book, her notebook, devil's advocate. She wrote that at the very top.
Okay.
And that reminded her in every meeting to always ask that question. Now, she went from struggling to control to an outstanding performer in a very short space of time. And I hope she would tell you now that was the biggest coaching lesson she had at that part of her career. Now she is actually a super senior sales leader who is probably one of the best sales leaders I've ever come across. But we did agree that if she wasn't able to master this thing, then she wasn't going to succeed. And then the implication of that is that she probably would have to leave the business. So, in a kind of a way, it was an informal personal improvement plan, or a PIP. But it turned her into a mediocre performer to an outstanding performer. And so that was my great success. And also, I'm super proud of her. I've worked with her 4 times in different companies now. In fact, I always hire her when I can. And she smashes it every time. And she's probably one of the best coaches I've ever come across. But the conversation I had with her was 26 years ago. And now she's one of industry's finest performers and leaders.
What a super story. And the fact that you could do it, and it was, finding that one thing that's going to turn her around, and then just helping her take off. Amazing.
And just can I add to that? That's a really important point you just raised. If you're trying to coach someone, don't try to fix 3 or 4 things in one go. Focus on one thing that can really make a difference. Master that, make it part of the DNA, and then you can look at other things to grow.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, we learn from our mistakes, but it's even better to learn from other people's mistakes and other people's triumphs. So, Mike, thanks ever so much for that.
No, you're very welcome.
If you are an aspiring or new sales manager in complex business to business, or you know of somebody who is, you may want to go to www.realsalesmanager.com. That's realsalesmanager, all one word.com, to learn about our unique blend of training and coaching to help become as effective as possible, as quickly as possible.